It starts like any ordinary afternoon. A mother walks hand in hand with her 3-year-old son through the quiet streets of Richmond. It's broad daylight. She's just picked him up from nursery, and in her mind the day is already over. Dinner, bath, bedtime story. Normal, safe, forgettable. Then 2 motorcycles roar past, engines snapping the calm in half. They brake hard and stop ahead of her. They're not passing through. They're waiting. One rider dismounts and strides toward her. His face is hidden, his body language cold and decisive. He grabs her arm so hard, it leaves finger-mark bruises that will linger long after this moment is over. Then he says the sentence that would haunt every parent in London. "Give me your rings. I'm going to hurt your child and take him away." In that instant, this stops being a robbery. This is a psychological execution, a carefully aimed shot at a mother's deepest fear. She panics, clutches her son, and does the only thing her brain can process. She drags her 3-year-old out into the road, willing to risk oncoming traffic rather than let these men touch her child. This wasn't just another opportunistic street crime. This was psychological warfare, and it was being carried out by the most sophisticated criminal gang London had seen in decades. A gang so advanced, so organized, that when police finally took them down, moped-enabled crime across the entire capital dropped by 52%, not over a decade, not over 5 years, practically overnight. The story I'm about to tell you sounds like something ripped from a thriller, but every single detail is documented fact. Court records, police reports, CCTV footage, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why this case reveals something far darker than kids on stolen scooters snatching phones. To understand how a handful of criminals could terrorize an entire city, you need to see London the way they saw it in 2017. The city is under siege. Every single day, 74 moped-enabled crimes are being committed. According to the figures, that's 1 every 90 minutes. Phones snatched from hands mid-conversation. Watches ripped from wrists so fast the victims barely register the pain until after. Designer bags torn from shoulders in a blur of helmet, visor, and exhaust fumes. The police? They look powerless. Traditional pursuit tactics, the stuff that works on cars and vans, just don't work on nimble mopeds that can weave between buses, bounce up onto pavements, and disappear down alleyways where patrol vehicles can't follow. These riders know the city's arteries and backstreets better than most cab drivers. And here's the part that'll bend your mind. By 2018, London isn't just dealing with a spike in scooter thefts. It has become the moped crime capital of the world. More dangerous than Naples, more chaotic than Barcelona. Headlines scream, social media fills with grainy clips of attacks, and ordinary Londoners start looking over their shoulders every time they feel a motorbike approach. Which raises the question, why? What made London's gangs so different, so effective, so untouchable? If you're already gripped by this and want more stories like it, you know what to do. Hit that like button. It takes half a second, but it tells YouTube that these deep dives into the real criminal underworld actually matter. Because this is just the opening act. The answer to what made these gangs different starts with one name, Terry Marsh. Enter Terry Marsh. Not the famous boxer. That's a whole separate story with its own shadows and secrets. But a 32-year-old from Fulham who would quietly become the architect of one of the most audacious crime sprees modern London has ever seen. On paper, he was just another local lad. In reality, he was running a network with the discipline of a military unit and the paranoia of an intelligence agency. Most street-level criminals get caught because they're sloppy. They brag in the pub. They keep the same phone for months. They show up on CCTV wearing the same jacket. Terry Marsh wasn't that kind of criminal. He operated like a commander behind enemy lines. Police would later discover he had 3 different mobile phones and around 20 SIM cards. He rotated them constantly, never leaving a digital trail long enough to follow. Numbers appeared, burned out, and vanished. This wasn't estate-level thinking. This was operational security. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in counter-terror manuals or spycraft training, not in a South London moped crew. And that raises our first serious question. Where does a supposed street criminal learn the sort of counter-surveillance techniques that would make MI5 nod in approval? We'll come back to that. Because once you understand Marsh's background, things start to look a lot less random. New Year's Eve, 31st December, 2017. While most of London is thinking about fireworks, resolutions, and the hangover waiting on the other side of midnight, Marsh and his crew are preparing for war. Their target, High Street, Kensington, one of the wealthiest shopping districts in the world. It's past midnight. The streets are quieter, shutters down, staff gone home. Suddenly, a stolen Range Rover comes screaming around the corner like it's been ripped out of an action movie. Behind it, a convoy of mopeds. No hesitation, no scouting about. They know exactly where they're going. They plow straight into the front of Ultimus Limited, a high-end outdoor clothing store. Glass explodes inward. In seconds, masked figures pour through the gap. They head straight for a very particular prize. Canada Goose jackets. Not random items off the rack, but high-value, high-demand gear. Each jacket can retail for up to £2,000. In a matter of minutes, tens of thousands of pounds in stock are ripped from hangers, bundled, and loaded. By the time police arrive, they're ghosts. Most gangs would ride that win and disappear for a while, lay low, count their money, show off, maybe argue about the split. Not Terry Marsh. Within a month, they hit the same store again. That alone tells you something. This isn't smash and grab greed. It's targeted, almost industrial. They've identified a lucrative supply, and now they're treating it like a pipeline. But this time, there's a security guard. He's not a cop, not a soldier, just a man doing his job, paid to stand between expensive glass and the people who want to break it. When he tries to intervene, they don't just push past him, they attack. He's violently assaulted, thrown into the street like he's rubbish in the way. They leave him with head injuries, bruises all over his body, and trauma that doesn't show up on X-rays. Later in court, he tells the judge he feels unprotected when he goes to work now. He's afraid it could all happen again. This is the moment the story shifts. Up to this point, you could try to write it off as brazen theft. But when you're hitting the same place twice, coordinating vehicles, and willing to use that level of violence for clothing, you're looking at something else. A gang that isn't scared of attention. A leader who doesn't care if he leaves human wreckage behind, as long as the operation runs on schedule. And just when you think you've seen how far they're willing to go, the planning moves from shops and side streets to one of the most prestigious sporting events on the planet. March 22nd, 2018. The kind of date that should just be a line in a sports almanac, not a crime file. It's the day of the Oxford versus Cambridge boat race, one of Britain's most prestigious sporting events. Millions are watching worldwide. The BBC has poured hundreds of thousands of pounds into specialized camera rigs, long lenses, and remote units, all to capture every stroke on the Thames in crystal clarity. On the surface, it's tradition and pageantry. Underneath, someone else is watching for a very different reason. Terry Marsh's gang has done their homework. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment idea cooked up in a pub. They know where the cameras are, which ones are fixed, which ones move. They know where security is heavy and where it thins out. They've identified blind spots, the places where a bike can slip in and out, without immediately appearing on every screen in the control room. Two mopeds roll toward Putney Bridge around 2 p.m. The atmosphere is festive, crowded, loud. It's the perfect kind of chaos for someone who wants to hide in plain sight. The riders aren't here to watch the race. They're carrying angle grinders, the kind of tools you use to chew through metal. But in their hands, they're also weapons. An off-duty police officer, Stephen Wagstaff, spots that something's off. The way they move, the way they're looking, not at the river, not at the boats, but at the infrastructure. He steps in, even though he's technically not on the clock. That one decision puts him face to face with a gang that has absolutely no fear of attacking a cop. One of the riders charges at him, kicking out violently. Another threatens to stab him. A third waves an angle grinder like a makeshift sword. screaming death threats over the noise of the crowd and engines. For a few tense seconds, it's a standoff. One man against multiple armed criminals. Wagstaff stands his ground. He doesn't back down. But before reinforcements can lock it down, the gang disappears, engines screaming away into the maze of London's streets. If this were just random, badly thought-out chaos, that would be the end of it. But it isn't. Exactly 1 hour later, they strike again. Different location along the course. Different camera. This time, there's no failed attempt. No heroic intervention that derails them. They go in, execute, and get out. And what they take isn't a phone or a watch or a handbag. They steal a specialized BBC camera worth around £180,000. Not just expensive, but rare, customized, and extremely recognizable. That camera is never recovered. Now pause and think about what that actually means. How does a group of street criminals know which pieces of kit are worth six figures and which are standard issue? How do they know where those cameras are going to be positioned on race day? How do they walk into one of the most heavily covered sporting events in the country and walk away not just with loot, but with the exact piece of gear that would hurt a broadcaster the most? And maybe the most important question of all, who buys a £180,000 piece of broadcasting equipment? You can't just shove that on Facebook Marketplace. You can't sell it out of the boot of a car. This isn't the kind of thing some anonymous buyer picks up at a street market. It's specialist, traceable, and almost certainly logged and tracked. Unless, of course, you're not dealing with local fences anymore. Unless you're plugged into networks that know how to strip, reconfigure, ship, or repurpose equipment at an international level. This was the moment where Marsh's gang stopped looking like a terrifying local phenomenon and started to resemble something else entirely. A unit operating with military-level planning, access to information, and a market for niche, high-risk, high-value goods. But if you think this is as dark as it gets, you're wrong. Because soon, their violence would stop being about prestige targets and start focusing on something even more powerful: the emotions of an entire nation. June 21st, 2018. Another ordinary weekday on paper. A normal Thursday afternoon in Richmond. The kind of day that blurs into all the others if nothing goes wrong. Her name is Phoebe Ruil. She's just collected her 3-year-old son from nursery. They're walking hand in hand down Kew Road, their pace unhurried. To anyone watching, they're invisible. Just another parent and child in a city full of them. But someone is watching, and they are anything but invisible to him. 2 motorcycles pass them, engines growling low. They roll ahead, slow, then come to a stop. Just like in that first scene we talked about. They're not moving on. They're waiting. One of the men gets off his bike. His name is John McFadden, 24 years old. He doesn't look like a mastermind. He looks like another face behind a visor. But what he does next will be replayed across Britain again and again. He walks straight toward this mother and child, like he's done this 100 times before. He grabs her arm, fingers clamping down hard enough to leave bruises in the shape of his hand. And then he says the words that shatter any illusion of safety. "Give me your rings. I'm going to hurt your child and take him away." For a heartbeat, time freezes. What do you do when someone tells you they're going to take your child? Fight? Scream? Freeze? CCTV footage shows her making a brutal, instinctive choice. Phoebe drags her 3-year-old into the road, toward oncoming traffic, because in that moment, the cars seem less dangerous than the men standing in front of her. Up scaffolding nearby, builders see what's happening. There's that split second of, "Is this really?" And then it clicks. They grab scaffolding poles and charge. Not because they're trained heroes, not because they're armed, but because some things you just don't stand and watch. The gang panics, engines howl, and they tear away. But they don't escape. Not really. Because the cameras caught everything. The footage goes viral. Amanda Holden, from Britain's Got Talent, shares it on social media with a message that's half plea, half fury. Call 101 or 999 if you know these scumbags. Millions of people see it. It's on news bulletins, talk shows, front pages. People who've never thought about moped crime suddenly can't stop thinking about it. Parents watch the clip and imagine themselves in Phoebe's place. The fear is contagious. The media calls it a new low for London crime. Parliament discusses it. Police are grilled. How is this happening in broad daylight? How can a mother walking home with her child be threatened like this and feel completely unprotected? And here's where the story takes a turn most people never noticed. Because what if this moment, this viral outrage, this national anger, wasn't just a byproduct of cruelty, but part of the design? Let's talk timing. The police operation that would eventually bring this gang down, Operation Fieldhouse, didn't begin after this clip exploded. It started in February 2018. Months earlier, officers were already quietly watching, tracking, building a case. The child threat incident in Richmond? That happened in June 2018, 4 months into the investigation. It almost looks like the gang knew eyes were on them, and instead of backing off, they cranked the dial to maximum, like they wanted to force a reaction. Push the public, push the press, push the police. What if threatening a child in front of a camera wasn't just about stealing jewelry? What if it was calculated psychological warfare, designed to trigger maximum rage, maximum pressure, maximum heat? Because while the world was sharing that clip, something else was happening in the background. Detectives were quietly connecting dots, poring over data, and starting to see that this wasn't just about one gang on mopeds. It was about how far organized crime was willing to go to bend an entire city to its will. By now, it would be comforting to think this was just a London problem, a freak storm of crime born out of one city's blind spots. But once you start digging into the data, you realize something unsettling. London wasn't an outlier. It was just one node in a much bigger pattern. Between 2017 and 2018, London's streets were buzzing with stolen mopeds. But so were Barcelona's. Naples reported the same wave. Paris saw organized moped crews using almost identical tactics. Fast-moving bikes, masked riders, coordinated hits on high-value targets. Different languages, different skylines, same playbook. This wasn't a handful of kids improvising on the fly. It looked like a template being copied, tweaked, and deployed across Europe. If you were to zoom out on a map for those 2 years, you'd see a constellation of incidents blinking across multiple cities, all telling the same story. And then there's the trip to Redditch. 4 members of Marsh's gang travel all the way from London to Redditch in Worcestershire, over 100 miles to steal 3 very specific motorcycles. Not any bikes they could find. Not a random snatch from a side street. 3 motorcycles belonging to one man who made a simple online mistake. He accidentally posted his address while trying to sell them on eBay. Think about the layers of that. Someone had to see the listing. Someone had to notice the exposed address. Someone had to realize the bikes were valuable enough to justify the journey, coordinate transport, and plan the theft. That's not a crime of opportunity. That's intelligence gathering. Data turned into action. At this point, a picture starts to emerge. These aren't just reckless riders flying around London looking for easy scores. They're plugged into information streams, online marketplaces, social media, maybe even insiders who know what's worth taking and where it is. And where there's sophisticated targeting, there's always one more question. Where does the money go? Let's talk numbers. From just 2 raids on the same store, they took around £43,000. From one business, they stole approximately £83,000 worth of MacBooks. The Canada Goose jackets? At up to £2,000 apiece, those runs added tens of thousands more. That's before you add in the BBC camera, the motorcycles, the phones, the watches, the day-to-day robberies. Conservative estimates put the total value of stolen goods at over £300,000. That's just what we can track from documented incidents. The real figure could be higher. So, when police finally move in, raid properties, turn over mattresses, check cupboards, they must be expecting a payday, right? Stashes of cash, hidden safes, luxuries that don't match declared incomes. Instead, they find around £6,000 in cash, some weapons, some stolen items. Evidence, yes, but nowhere near the kind of money you'd expect after months of high-value hits. So where is it? You don't just lose hundreds of thousands of pounds. It doesn't evaporate. You don't sell that volume of high-end stock at a car boot sale under a fake name. And you don't move that much product that quickly without leaving a digital footprint unless you've got help. The logical answer is simple and terrifying. You don't fence £300,000 worth of high-end merchandise without access to serious infrastructure. Real fences, professional handlers, people who can move goods from city to city or out of the country entirely, faster than police can log the reports. People who already have clients lined up for specific items before they're even stolen. This is where the lines between Moped gang and organized crime network start to blur. Because behind the chaos on the streets, there's a quiet, disciplined process. Identify target, extract goods, move goods, wash money, and when detectives examined the phones, addresses, and locations linked to Marsh's crew, they saw hints of something bigger. References to co-conspirators, caches of evidence at other addresses, connections that never made the headlines. London looked like a battlefield, but the real war? That was being fought in the shadows through bank transfers, burner phones, and backroom deals. May 7th, 2018. By now, the streets of London are a chessboard, and every move matters. 3 of Marsh's men, Omar Tafat, Josh Strongmears, and Kian Taylor, are about to make the kind of move that finally forces the police to flip the board. It starts with a knife-point robbery. Quick, brutal, familiar. A victim threatened, property taken, and 3 criminals piling onto a single moped like they're invincible. For months they've skimmed through traffic, outpaced patrol cars, melted into side roads and estates where uniforms won't follow at speed. But today, something shifts. The call comes in, and officers move. This time, instead of a brief, futile pursuit, it turns into one of the most dramatic police chases in London's recent history. For the next 90 minutes, the city becomes a racetrack. They tear through central London, weaving between cars, blasting through red lights. Police motorcycles pursue them relentlessly. Dog units are mobilized. A helicopter tracks them from above, watching as they dart from borough to borough. 10 different boroughs, in fact. 10 slices of London, all connected by the frantic path of one overloaded moped. At one point, they go the wrong way up the A40 into oncoming traffic. Imagine that. Headlights rushing toward you, horns blaring, drivers swerving in panic. To most people, that's unthinkable. To these 3, it's just another escape route. They've planned for this. They're not running blindly. They've arranged for an associate to wait by the roadside with fuel so they can keep going. That's not improvisation. That's logistics. And they're not just fleeing for survival. They're filming it. They intend to use the footage for social media clout, to turn a deadly chase into entertainment, into proof of their own legend. It's arrogance stacked on top of recklessness, the perfect combination for leaving evidence behind. The chase finally ends near South Ealing Cemetery. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe it's just the odds catching up. The moped crashes. 3 men, 1 smashed bike, and suddenly the most untouchable crew in London has 3 of its key players in handcuffs. On its own, that would be a win. But it's not the end. It's the beginning of something much bigger. Because behind the scenes, the Metropolitan Police's trident proactive team had already started to build something more ambitious than just catch the riders. Operation Fieldhouse wasn't a reaction to a single event. It was a 12-month, intelligence-led campaign to map and dismantle an entire network. They knew these criminals were forensically aware, careful not to leave DNA, wearing gloves, masks, layered clothing. So instead of waiting for a mistake in a lab, they turned to data, phone records, cell site analysis, patterns of movement, conversations and contact chains hidden in the metadata of those 20 constantly rotating SIM cards Terry Marsh thought made him invisible. Piece by piece, Borough by borough, they linked defendants to offences, the multiple vehicles, the shared mopeds, the Range Rover used in the Ultima smash and grabs, all started to connect like pins and string on a detective's wall. When they finally moved in July 2018, they weren't just arresting a random scattering of thieves, they were arresting a structure. At various addresses, they found weapons, cash, stolen goods, multiple vehicles tied to raids, and, more importantly, enough evidence for prosecutors to describe the entire operation as professional, planned, and organized. The impact was immediate and brutal, but this time, for the criminals, once just 12 key people were removed from the streets. Moped-enabled crime across London dropped by 52% within a year. 12 individuals in a city of 9 million. Half a category of crime gone, almost overnight. Let that sink in. You don't get those numbers from taking out a casual gang. You only get them when you've put a knife into the central nervous system of something much larger. Operation Fieldhouse didn't just close cases. It exposed how deep, how structured, and how quietly powerful this network had become. But even with arrests made and statistics celebrating victory, the strangest part was still ahead. The day they all stood in court, and the questions that refused to die even after the sentences were handed down. Kingston Crown Court, May 13th and 14th, 2019. Instead of screaming engines and smashed glass, it's the heavy quiet of a courtroom. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, security at the doors. In the dock, 12 men stand shoulder to shoulder. No mopeds, no helmets, just defendants. Judge Georgina Kent looks down at them. But she's not just seeing 12 individuals. Over weeks of evidence, she's been shown something else. CCTV clips, phone records, victim statements, crash scenes, maps with lines of movement scrawled across London. What emerges isn't a picture of impulsive, opportunistic crime. It's a blueprint of organization. At the center of it all, Terry Marsh, the man with 3 phones, 20 SIMs, and the nerve to treat London like his personal hunting ground. The mastermind. He's sentenced to 13 years and 2 months in prison. Long enough to make headlines. Short enough to make people wonder what happens when he gets out. Around him, the others follow. Kian Taylor, 9 years and 4 months. Omar Tafhat, 8 years and 5 months. The rest of the gang receive sentences that add up, collectively, to around 67 years behind bars. On paper, it looks like justice, a clear win. Operation Fieldhouse is hailed as a success, and in many ways, it is. Because the numbers don't lie. You take just 12 men off the streets of a city of 9 million people, and moped-enabled crime drops by 52% within a year. That's not a dent, that's a collapse. It proves what detectives suspected. This wasn't just another gang. It was a central hub, a supply line, a nerve center. Cut that, and half the chaos disappears. But even as the sentences are read, the questions hang in the air. Where did the money go? The hundreds of thousands in stolen goods that never turned into visible wealth. Who exactly were the co-conspirators mentioned in court documents, but never named publicly? What was in those caches of evidence, at other addresses that never made it into press briefings? And then there's the strangest detail of all for people who follow crime closely. The name. Terry Marsh. The very same name as the boxer involved in the infamous Frank Warren shooting case. Coincidence? Maybe. But in criminal circles, using a name with its own dark history can be a statement. A calling card. A way of saying, we know exactly what we're doing. Court documents hint at more than robbery. There are references to handling stolen goods, money laundering, and conspiracies that look like they stretch beyond mopeds and street-level hits. When you put that next to the European pattern, similar gangs in Barcelona, Naples, Paris, using the same tactics, a bigger picture starts to form. This wasn't just a London story. It was one tentacle of a hydra that crosses borders. Meanwhile, the human cost never fully resets. Today, Phoebe Ruehl still feels a spike of fear when she walks her children to and from school. The security guard from Ultimus still goes to work, carrying the memory of being thrown into the street like he didn't matter. The businesses that were hit are still living with the financial scars and the psychological reality that a shopfront is not a shield. The truth is, Operation Fieldhouse didn't solve moped crime. It exposed how evolved organized crime has become, how a small, tightly run unit can hijack an entire city's sense of safety, how the people pulling strings might not be the ones riding the bikes. If this story made you see organized crime in the UK differently, do me a favor, share this video. The more people understand how these networks work, the harder it is for them to hide in the noise. And if you think this was intense, wait until you hear what's coming next. In the next episode, we're traveling to Birmingham to look at a gang that took things even further, using drone technology to coordinate drug operations across 3 different countries. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because that story makes this one look almost simple. So what do you think? Was Operation Fieldhouse really about stopping moped crime, or was it about quietly cutting into something much bigger? Let me know in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up if it made you think, and I'll see you next week in the shadows of Britain's hidden criminal underworld.